howdy. Welcome in. As we get started, I'm curious for you to tell me, what do you see? Okay, can I have some more specificity, please? I hear a girl. It's better than a person or a human. Oh, you see two things. Very good. That's wisdom speaking there. An old lady? All right. Yeah, like the choker or the necklace is a mouth. Okay. Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah, that's a classic, wasn't it? I love illusions. They're beautiful things. So we can see two different things here in looking at the same image, right? Well, in life, it's all about perspective and being able to see two sides of things. And as we're studying our divided kings and kingdoms period, we can do as the kings do, and we can, not exclusively, but often look at things through an Israelite perspective. Or we can do as the Chronicles do, and we can shift and we can see things more through a Judean perspective. Well, we've looked at this war with the Syrians that's been taking place from an Israelite perspective, and we've had the same king now for double deuces. 22 years, his name is in Israel. Ahab, we don't have him anymore. He's deceased, right? And we looked at things from the Israelite perspective. But we're going to be shifting this morning and looking things at the same events from the Judean perspective. And the king in the south, we've learned a little bit about him, but we didn't get it, really deeply into his life. We'll do that a little bit more these next few class periods. What's his name? Southern king. Jehoshaphat. These are Jehoshaphat. It's kind of fun to say, but it's not always easy. Yeah, good job, Justin. So we're looking at Jehoshaphat. I don't know about you, but it gets kind of tough for me because you have a lot of different names that are similar, and I always want to say Josiah. No, that's a different king for another time. But yeah, Jehoshaphat is who we're discussing right now. We're finishing up today this section that we've had for several class periods now, with the exception of last week in our meeting. The prophets of this stretch of Israel and Judah. So we've seen some anonymous prophets. We've revisited a very familiar one in Elijah. We talked about a new one. We'll rehash some of that today with Micaiah. And then we'll also discuss again the lying prophets of this section. We're in 2 Chronicles 18. I know we've done most of our study from the Samuels, and then we've almost finished 1 Kings. We will do that next week. We have 3 verses of 1 Kings that we haven't covered. We'll get back to that. I know we've left that off, and we'll finish it next week, and we'll get into 2 Kings. But the Chronicles are really good because they tend to be a little more detail-oriented. They focus almost exclusively on the Judean kings because it's all about David and dynasty, you might recall from our introductions in the Chronicles. But they are more detail-oriented. So I want to rewind just a little bit and reconsider from the Judah perspective in 2 Chronicles 18 and 19 before we finish up 1 Kings next week. So we're in chapter 18 of 2 Chronicles, verse 1. We are told that our king of the south, looking at things from his perspective now, Jehoshaphat had riches. He's doing well. And honor, respect. And this isn't just among his own. You might recall that this tribute has been pouring in from the nations surrounding. He has some tremendous military prowess. Go back to chapter 17, if you will. Back in chapter 17, it's mentioned in verse 12 that Jehoshaphat became increasingly powerful. He built fortresses, storage cities in Judah, much property in cities of Judah, men of war, mighty men of valor found in Jerusalem. We won't go through all those numbers again, but you count them all up, and we tally this down through verse 19 of the previous chapter, 1.16 million soldiers. He's no joke, all right? And I mentioned about the respect that he possesses from all around. Also in chapter 17, look in verse 10, the fear of the Lord fell on all the kingdoms of the land that were around Judah, so that they did not make war against Jehoshaphat. I think there's a lesson to be gained in this. Why do they know not to mess with Jehoshaphat and Judah? They're not a huge entity. I'll go ahead and take just a moment to switch to the map. And I know these provinces aren't cut out, but in our map that we've been using quite a bit for this section, you have about 2/3, if you're going from north to south, about 2/3 roughly down the Jordan River Valley, and cut that off. And then you have pretty much down to Beersheba. And I know it looks big on the screen, but I think you're aware of how tiny this area of the world really is anyway. I mean, can you imagine all these areas around? They're scared of him. They don't mess with Jehoshaphat. Why not? There's the immediate thing that they see, and then probably the thing that they don't see. What's the immediate thing that you would notice about Jehoshaphat? We just talked about it. A massive army. All right, so when the army is built up, people are aware of that, and they're afraid, and they don't want to tinker with it. Comparatively, you might say, when the army shrinks and the military is small, people notice that, and they're not quite as afraid any longer. So that's what people are seeing. But what are people maybe not seeing as to the reason for Jehoshaphat's strength? And that's really where we're picking up in chapter 18. Why is he so strong? It's really not about his military. There you go. He has the strength of the Almighty behind him, and he has a big military, and he has riches, and he has honor, the respect in his nation, and from countries around, because he's a servant of Yahweh, and Yahweh is blessing him every step of the way. So before we get back to our text, though, in chapter 17, the fear of the Lord fell on all those that were around the lands around Judah. They did not make war with Jehoshaphat. So listen to this. Also some of the Philistines, these are the big, tough guys here. The Philistines even brought Jehoshaphat presents and silver as tribute. The Arabians brought him flocks, 7,700 rams, 7,700 male goats. They're recognizing the significance of 7, aren't they? Almost like they're even coming to respect the God of the people of Judah. Well, maybe not followers of him, but even they have some fear for him. So Jehoshaphat became increasingly powerful. And that's where we read just a moment ago. So let's go back to our text today, though. Chapter 18, that's just a brief review since it's been a couple of weeks. Verse 1, Jehoshaphat had riches and honor and abundance. We're going to pause right there. Keep your spot because this is our main text for today. Go back to what usually is our main text in 1 Kings, please. 1 Kings chapter 22, that's the last one of the book. 1 Kings 22, and let's reread what we covered just in verses 41 through 48. You've stated it. Want to show why biblically this is the case, that Jehoshaphat's having so much success as king over Judah. Verse 41, Jehoshaphat, who is, and I know this has been a little while, but he's the son of Asa, because we've been talking for so long again about the kings of Israel. We're about to switch over some more for some Judean kings, but we've been in Israel for a long time. Store this away that Jehoshaphat was the son of Asa. This will come into play at the end of our class period. He began to reign over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Okay, we're looking at like 869 is what the year is that he begins to reign. Just remind me here, how long does Ahab reign in Israel? Close. There you go, double deuces for him, right. That's okay, because we have so many numbers, I know, and we're getting to that one, aren't we? 25, good, Justin. But really close to that, 22 years, so he takes over in the 4th year. All right, let's just store that away. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 25, that's our 25, isn't it? So 25 years he reigned in Jerusalem. So let's compare the two of these. He reigns how many years longer just than Ahab himself reigns? 3 years, very good. But he starts 4 years into Ahab's reign. Therefore, we take that 4 and we tack it on to, he reigns 7 years, right? 7 years longer than what Ahab reigns. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So Ahab has died. He's removed from the scene, but the point of which is this. Of the 25-year reign of Jehoshaphat, he will reign 7 years after the death of Ahab. So we have that also. Continuing reading here, his mother's name, that is Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat's mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. He walked in all the way of Asa his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. So we go back to, why does he have success? He's in this, he's in this little bubble, and everyone around him is impressed with this guy. He's doing a tremendous job as king, and he has this influence over areas probably at least 5, maybe 10 times greater than what his is. Why? Because he respects God, and God blesses him. It's that simple. We're finding this pattern over and over again with the kings. That doesn't mean everything he did was perfect. He's a human being, and he has some chinks in the armor. Yet, we're told, the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. Now, you told me 2 weeks ago that there's only one place these offerings are supposed to be made. Where are they? In the temple in the city of Jerusalem. But there are these scattered raised elevations where sacrifices are being given. Is that ideal? No. Is it not exact, or is it exactly what God has in mind? Absolutely not. But why does God still tolerate this and say, I can hold my nose a little bit with this? There you go, and that's a plus, right, Marcy? They're still worshiping God, whereas in the north, they're worshiping the golden calves still. Seems like Baal worship's taken a real hit lately. But there's still idolatry going on in the north. In the south, at least worship is still being given to God himself. And so could it be better? Yeah. I think it falls into one of those categories of Acts 17:30. As the human race has kind of gone through its infancy stage and maybe is about 8 or 9 years old, relatively speaking. God looks down on the human race and he's like, this isn't exactly what I've said. This isn't perfectly what I have in mind, but Acts 17:30. Truly, these times of ignorance, God overlooked. He was very patient with humanity through the years. But as the human race gets into adolescence, he expects more. As the human race gets into the age of Jesus and the church, which is full-blown adulthood, he expects it fully the way that he's intended. But now he commands all men everywhere to repent. So anyway, I think that's a help in understanding and interpreting that passage. All right, so everything's not perfect. Verse 44, Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel. There are 2 sections in this little, 4-verse sliver in 1 Kings 22 about Jehoshaphat's life. And there's this category of, man, he's a good guy, doing what God wants. And then there's this asterisk category, like, it could be better. So into which category does it seem this last statement falls here? Also, he made peace with the king of Israel. Into which category does this seem to be placed in the division line? Okay, could be. You know, you have the side of things like, being peaceful, that's really nice, right? Good, I think so. Yeah, you just look at 1 Kings and it almost sounds like, well, that's a positive characteristic, isn't it? Well, let's get back into our passage and see if that's what the Lord has in mind by this statement of inspiration. So we're in 2 Chronicles 18. For all have come in, great to have everybody. 2 Chronicles 18, Jehoshaphat, verse 1, has riches, honor, and abundance. And we're told, by marriage, he allied himself with Ahab. Then we get into verse 2. After some years, he went down to visit King Ahab in Samaria. I hate that Roy and Bobby are sick. I think probably about everybody saw that. Hopefully they're feeling better. If not, they will soon. But he'd mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that's a strange statement about going down. Where's the king of Judah located? Where does he live? South. Thank you. You mind to tell me a town south? Or? Yeah, that's right. No, not that far south. Very good. What's the capital city in the south? No, but just to the east of there. Yeah, there you go. Jerusalem. Remember, yeah. So in the south, his capital is in Jerusalem, and he goes to visit the king in Samaria. That's north. And we know, of course, by now that's the principal palace where it's found, and that's the capital. There's another palace we know of by now in Jezreel, the Ivory Palace. But Samaria is the main one where the capital's found, and he goes. That's about, you can tell by the legend, about 30 miles to the northwest. And this is one of those interesting statements of the Bible that he goes down and he heads north to do that, right? But we understand by now there's a difference in elevation. So I looked these up just to make sure. Let me know if you find anything on this. Now, you can find things, or I did. You may be able to find more than what I did. But you can find a little more information on the region of Samaria. But there's a city of Samaria also. And it's tougher to find information on the ancient city of Samaria, the capital city of the divided kingdom of Israel. But I looked up Jerusalem. It's a shade under 2,500 feet in elevation. That's pretty high in what we would think of a non-mountainous area. And I know there are mountains, and I mean it's more like the Ozarks Hills. So I mean that's pretty high, 2,500 feet. Of course, the city of 7 hills, and there's some areas around Samaria that are about 3,000 feet in elevation. So it does appear that it goes down. I did see one. I'm not sure about the source and how trustworthy, but and for certain what they were trying to express, but it almost sounded like 300 feet in elevation. I think that's too low for that area. But anyway, the point of which is this: there is some descent down in elevation to go from Jerusalem to Samaria. Well, that's what the king of the south does. After some years, he, Jehoshaphat, from his perspective, went down to visit Ahab in Samaria. And Ahab, the king of the north, killed sheep and oxen in abundance for him and the people who were with him, and persuaded him to go up with him to Ramoth Gilead. First of all, these two are starting to spend more time together. Why? They're family now. Yeah, it would be their children that have intermarried. And you see this a lot among the nations. And as here, notice not, well, they intermarried or they fell in love. No, it's a marriage alliance. That's what it is. This is political, it's strategically chosen. Hey, my boys with your daughter, or my daughter with your boy, that kind of thing. And so they're building these relations, they're family, they start spending more time together, and they're going to have a celebration of kingly proportions, 2 nations, whenever their families get together. And Ahab persuaded him to go up with him to Ramoth Gilead. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Beautiful. Ponds. Your ponds getting filled up yet for those who have them? Overflowing? Good. We needed it. Man, they've been awful around here. Anyway, so Ahab persuades his visitor, Jehoshaphat, to go with him to Ramoth Gilead. If you'll notice, that's on the east side of the Jordan River. As the bird flies, you're looking at a distance of about 70 miles due east. Now, I know this is somewhat of a recollection here, but why does he want him to go with him to Ramoth Gilead? What could happen over to the east of the river? Nice. That's a great memory. That's a college memory right there, Justin. College graduate memory is what that is. So, yeah, good job, buddy. So what Justin's saying, if I'm accurately representing him and repeating this, he says that the king of Syria, anybody know his name? Not Ben-Hur, but he's his cousin. Ben-Hadad, there we go, very good. So Ben-Hadad, who's this ruthless ruler of Syria, is a thorn in Israel's side for decades. He has taken, his father had, and he remains in control of these Israelite cities throughout the territory, including he has a grocery store, he has a Syrian booth that he's selling out of in Samaria, right? This has all been forced upon the people of Israel, including the city of Ramoth Gilead. The king of Israel, Ahab, has the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, delivered into his hand. He can do whatever he wants with him. God expects him just to execute justice. That's all. This is Saddam Hussein all over again, who's been delivered into his hands. And what does the king of Israel do? He says, "Oh, you're not my enemy. You're my brother. We're best friends." Yeah, brother, best friends. Exactly. And he says, "Hey, I tell you what, you let me live, I appreciate this. I'll let you set up your own grocery store. You can have your own Israelite booth in Damascus, in the capital city, in my territory, just like my dad did in yours. Cities of the Israelites, my dad, he's a mean guy. That he took away, I'll give them all back to you. Okay. They shake on it, gentleman's handshake, and they leave each other's company. Years later, now Ahab's concerned with taking by force these cities. He shouldn't have to do that. The guy is not a man of his word. God's upset with him. And he says, the punishment the king of Syria had coming to him is now on you. The punishment that was going to come to the Syrians, now you're responsible for the punishment that's lifted and going to be placed on your people, the Israelites. Ahab's in trouble. He needs some help. And he knows he doesn't have divine help in this. So he calls out to his buddy to the south, makes a marriage alliance, and the man with a strong military, he encourages him and he accepts the challenge to go fight against the Syrians. Yes, ma'am, Helen. No, you're fine. Sure. So what it is in 1 Kings, it's brevity. It's just like, it's just brevity. It's this guy comes on the scene, he reigns for 25 years, he does a lot of good things, and then he dies. But then in 2 Chronicles, chapters 17 through 20, there are a lot more details that are contained prior to the recording of his death. Does that make sense? Yeah. So in the Chronicles, a lot of times there are just more details than are in the others. And an example might be from the harmony of the Kings, Chronicles, and Samuel. It's kind of like a harmony of the gospel accounts. And let's say in Mark, you have 16 chapters. You don't get into a lot of detail, believed to be the earliest one that's written of the gospel accounts. In Luke, you have 20, which we're studying on Wednesday nights. We have 24 chapters. And so there will be a lot more details that are contained in that. So yeah, no, good question. Yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah, any others before we move on? So looking into these more elaborate details, he's aligned himself with this marriage. Ahab with Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat with Ahab, my boy with your daughter, or my daughter with your boy. And they come together, have this party, they're celebrating, eating all this food together, and Ahab convinces him to go with him, up with him to Ramoth Gilead. And that may give a little more credence, by the way, the up to statement of Samaria, the city, ancient city of Samaria, actually being considerably lower. You have Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal in that area. They're about 3,000 feet in elevation, but there is a good-sized valley between them and Shechem, and this is in a general vicinity of that area. But it mentions go up to. Now, on the east side of the Jordan River, it's not that it's so mountainous, but it rises up the Jordan River Valley, and there's a good-sized plateau. So a raised elevation, but relatively flat on the other side. Verse 3, so Ahab, king of Israel, said to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, will you go with me against Ramoth Gilead? And he answered him, I am as you are, and my people as your people. This is a good arrangement for the king of the north. I compared this a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of like Canada being like really good friends with the United States or Israel. Or they're pretty tough, though, in their own right. They're small, but they mean business a lot of times. Israel does. In my opinion, a very good leader over in that area of the world. But it would be like, even the United Kingdom being really good friends with the Americans. That's the case here. He answered, I am, Jehoshaphat speaking, as you are, Ahab, and my people as your people, we will be with you in the war. Also, Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, here's one thing I do request of you, though, and this is getting more into the familiar territory, so won't spend as much time on this. He says, please inquire before we go for the word of the Lord today. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, 400 men, and said to them, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? So they said, go up, for God will deliver it into the king's hand. Jehoshaphat's not content, though, with this response. It's unanimous. 400, all the prophets in agreement. You should go. But Jehoshaphat said, well, really what I'm after is not a bunch of prophets. All I need is just one. But what kind of prophet? All right, a prophet of Yahweh. And that may be a suggestion here. These are more, remember all the prophets of Baal and Asherah, they've been killed, the 850 of them combined. But these 400 prophets, maybe a little more servants along the lines of the golden calf worship. No, he says, I want to know from just one. That's all I need. Just one prophet of Yahweh. Should we go? So the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, there is still one man by whom we may inquire of the Lord. And by this point we know that all of the prophets of Yahweh, the priests and the Levites, they've all defected to the south, right? All the faithful. Well, what would that seem to tell you about, well, there is one prophet of the Lord left. Is he really a prophet of the Lord if he's sticking around? Oh, Justin, why is he around? I don't think it's by choice, but we find out later, why is he still in Israel? The king has made him a prisoner. That's why. And so he calls to him, it appears, from the prison, and he says, hey, you know, my new best friend, my new brother, and Jehoshaphat, he has to hear from you. And so he tries to lead the witness a little bit, this messenger that's sent to him. The king of Israel called to, I didn't finish verse 7. But he says, I hate him, because he never prophesies good concerning me, but always evil. He is Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And Jehoshaphat said, let not the king say such things. Delivers his fellow ruler a mild rebuke. So verse 9, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king, clothed in their royal robes, sat each one on his throne, and they sat at the threshing floor of the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets prophesied before them. Now this is interesting. Jehoshaphat says, I just need to hear from one guy. Just give me a prophet of the Lord. That's all I need. I want to inquire of him. Yet Ahab goes to all the trouble to bring these 400, apparently pagan prophets before Jehoshaphat to give their testimony first. Why do you think he would do that if he really doesn't care about what they have to say? There you go. There you go. Justin says it's a and pony show, and thank you for a similar comment, Emily. He wants him to hear, and maybe he thinks in the sheer numbers, this will help to convince him. You know, you get to thinking one way, it's hard to think of it. Have you ever tried that with something? Even if it's the right way, the other way, if you thought the wrong way for so long or heard it a whole bunch, it's hard to see things in another light. Verse 10, now Zedekiah, the son of Kenaanah, had made horns of iron, you remember this, for himself, and he said, thus says the Lord, using Yahweh's name. That's a powerful thing to do. With these you shall gore the Syrians until they're destroyed. Iron is a representative, of course, of strength, and he may have just been holding these horns in his hand, looking like a total dweeb. May have even stuck them on his head, and with these, kind of acting it out, with these you're going to gore, God says, the Syrians until they're all destroyed. And all the prophets, what he said. Go up to Gilead and prosper, for the Lord will deliver it into the king's hand. Verse 12, here's the leading of the witness. Now the messenger who had gone to call Micaiah spoke to him, saying, now listen, the words of the prophet with one accord encourage the king. What he's saying is, everybody in our culture is saying the same thing. Therefore, please let your word be like one of them and speak encouragement. Say good things. You never do, but you better, because everybody's saying it. Well, that makes it true, huh? And as Micaiah said, as the Lord lives, whatever my God says, that I will speak. You talk about courage. This isn't the first time we've seen this recently. Look, he says, you're outnumbered 400 to 1, so you better just go along with what they're saying. What were the numbers with Elijah a little while back? 1 Kings 18, Mount Carmel. Okay, we often point out 450, but really, you add the prophets of Asherah also, really it's 850 to 1. And boldly and in faith, Elijah stands and he says, look, I don't care if it's 50 billion to 1. The Lord's on my side, and here's what the Lord says. And that's the way it's going to be. And guess who's victorious when it's all said and done? 400 to 1. He's trying to be coerced, or people are trying to coerce him, the messenger. He says, you better do it. Hey, I don't care if it's 50 billion to 1. I'm just going to say what the Lord says. Then he came to the king, and the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? And he said, yeah, go and prosper, and they shall be delivered into your hand, just like all the other 400, which sounds a little confusing, but it's apparent from the reaction of the king. 15, how many times shall I, this has happened before, how many times shall I make you swear that you tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? He knows he's just being sarcastic, and he usually takes this tactic with him. He says, hey, knock off the act. You just tell me. And I don't know if he really means this or he's just upset and rashly these words fall out of his mouth. He says, just tell me the truth of what God speaks. Oh, okay. Well, if you want to go that route. Then he said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains, sheep that have no shepherd. The Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his house in peace. The king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, and everyone who's around understands this message. That means the king, Israel's king for 22 years, is about to die on the battlefield. They'll have no leader, and as is the case with sheep that have no shepherd, they become scattered, they're afraid, and they say, hey, let's quit the battle, let's go home. We have no one left to lead us. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you that he would prophesy not good concerning me, but evil? He always does this. But Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, all of hosts of heaven, standing on his right hand and his left. And we won't go through all of this again because there's a lot of repeat material in this from what we studied in 1 Kings 22. It's pretty neat and powerful, though, and this is a rare look into heaven's throne room and the discussions as to what takes place with us, with God, on a regular basis. Of course, God has, as Hebrews 1:13 and 14, ministers called angels who attend to us and our spiritual needs. There are all kinds of plans that God has for us even before things happen. The angels are involved in this. But we also know from the book of Job that there's this wicked, lying spirit that comes in among and has discussions in heaven's throne room also, or at least did at one point in time. Some believe that's changed by now. And regardless, we do know who's this lying evil spirit that often interjects himself and says, hey, let me have a say-so in human affairs. Who's that guy? And I think that's the lying spirit right here, Satan. And God has this discussion before it even happens, from our perspective anyway, on the earth, about, hey, Ahab, I need him to go up to Ramoth Gilead and to fight against the Syrians because I'm going to kill him there. Who has a good plan for this? Not that God really needs it. He likes to humor his creation. And he says, who wants to help me out? What do you think? How should we do this? And, well, one angel says, here are some possibilities of some events that we can arrange to encourage. God never forces anyone's will, but he can arrange things to be done the way he wants, still with freedom of human choice being involved. And then there's this evil, lying spirit that steps forward and says, hang on. Let me use his prophets to tell him the lies that are needed to persuade him to get him there. Kind of like, hey, let me do this to your servant Job. And God doesn't do evil, right? God doesn't put lying messages, not hands-on literally, into people's mouths and cause people to believe him. But he lets that be evil sources. He says, okay, well, my will is this, that Ahab goes up to Ramoth Gilead and he dies and he's punished for his sins. And all right, if you want to do some evil to get him there, I'll let you. I'll let you do that. I don't believe this is an angel. I believe this is Satan himself. And just like in the book of Job, God allows Satan to do some evil work to bring about what the ultimate will of the Lord is. So we skip this little portion and we go down into verse 23. Then Zedekiah, the son of Kenaanah, went near and struck Micaiah on the cheek, hit him. And he said, which way did the Spirit of the Lord go from me to speak to you? This is that preacher battle right here. Micaiah said, "Indeed, you shall see on the day when you go into an inner chamber to hide." That's the preacher mic drop right there. Then the king of Israel said, "Take Micaiah, return him." So he's going back to where he was, to Ammon the governor of the city, to Joash the king's son, and say, "Thus says the king, put this fellow in prison. Return him" where? To prison. That's why he's still in Israel. "And feed him with the bread of affliction and water of affliction." In other words, just the bare bones necessities to keep him alive until I return in peace. But Micaiah said, "If you ever return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me." And he said, "Take heed, all you people, listen to the prophecy that I've made." How do you know whether a prophet's true according to Old Testament standards? How do you know whether to trust a prophet? Okay? A lot of times there are miracles involved, and there are a chunk of times like this, maybe not as much, but you're right, that is a lot of them. Moses and a number of others, Elijah, Elisha. Remember Deuteronomy 18, "If a prophet speaks in my name, the thing comes to pass, then you can count on him." You know, that's something that he's spoken. As long as he's speaking in my name and it's about worshiping me, there's special rules about not, Deuteronomy 13. But that's the general rule. If a prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh and it's proved that the word is false, what happens to that prophet? He'll be executed. He'll be stoned. This guy is willing to stake not only his prophetic work, his entire career, but as well his life on the message of the Lord. That's how much faith he has when everyone's saying he's wrong. He says, "No, that's what God said, and that's fine. Hey, you come back, the king comes, he's kill me. We'll see. We'll see who's right." Faith is trust in the Lord. So the king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, the king, they go up to Ramoth Gilead. We remember the disguising that takes place, very randomly. I love the wording of it. Let's look at that just really quickly again. So you go down in verse 33. "A certain man," not nobody special, but "a certain man drew a bow at random." And remember this? This is one of these things. "And it hits the king between the joints of his armor." The only place it can. He's disguised. I don't even think people really even know who he is at this moment. Do you really think you can escape God if it's your time for his judgment to come on you? No way it's going to happen. He says, "Turn around, take me out of the battle," to the driver's chariot. "I'm wounded." The battle increased that day. The king of Israel propped himself up, his chariot facing the Syrians until evening, and about the time of sunset, he died, according to the prophecy of the Lord. Chapter 19, verse 1. "Then Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah," so this is picking up here kind of where we left off. "Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned safely to his house." By the way, he cried out to the Lord in battle. The Lord heard him. Chronicles says. We don't find that detail, Helen, in Kings. It's just he's delivered out of the battle. But we find out why in Chronicles. He, a servant of God, asked for the Lord's help, and he saves him, takes him back home. Who would like to say our memory verse, number 2, as we wind things up here? 2 Chronicles 19:2. "And Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat," goes out to the king and he tells him, ask him this, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Therefore the wrath of the Lord is upon you." Who's he talking about? Should you help whenever God saved your life? But should you be helping the wicked? Who's the wicked? Okay. So now that goes back to, into which category now, hindsight being 2020, will we place that little detail? Also, he made a marriage alliance with the king of Ahab. He made a peace treaty with him. God's not okay with that because he's bringing his judgment and his punishment on this man, and he's trying to help him out of it. It appears he should have inquired more of the Lord or should have trusted more. You know, it's strange, isn't it, that he says, "I want to hear the word of the Lord." Should we go into battle from a prophet of the Lord? The prophet of the Lord comes and says, "No, you shouldn't do it." And he turns around and goes and does it anyway. It does. Have you ever been invested into something to a degree, and then like about 2/3 of the way through it, you find out this isn't going to turn out well. And you say, well, I've already committed this much to... I think that's probably where Jehoshaphat finds himself. He gets 2/3 of the way through this, and all this, he's built up the marriage alliance and the feast, and everything's going so well, and the relations between the two. They have a common enemy in the Syrians to the north. They can unite and fight against him. And then probably about 2/3 of the way into it, he finds out this isn't going to turn out well. Well, look at what I've monetarily and militarily and marriage, and I mean, it's kind of hard by that point, isn't it? I think that's probably what's going on here. Verse 3, nevertheless, God says, good things, Jehoshaphat, are found in you. So have you done everything that you should? No, you've made some mistakes for sure. But I appreciate that overall your life's works that you're trying, and you're doing good things for me. You've removed the wooden images from the land, and you have prepared your heart. And I think that's a key that we don't often see. You know, David, we talk about him. On the outside, he commits some egregious sins. But God sees on the inside and the person that he really is. And he also knows how he responds when he's given correction. And I think that's key here with Jehoshaphat. He's not a perfect person, just like all the rest of us. But God knows his heart and how he responds when he's given correction. Case in point, verse 4. So Jehoshaphat after this dwelt at Jerusalem, and he went out again among the people from Beersheba to the mountains of Ephraim. Do you remember the statements of the territory of God's people in years past? From where to Beersheba? Dan. I know we don't have that on the map, but that's up above the Sea of Kinnereth and Lake Hula, which used to be there up to the north. That's way up there. And now it's from Ephraim. I know we don't have that on the map, but latitude, that's about right here to Beersheba. Things aren't as good as they once were in the territory of God's people. But, you know, he's doing really well, and he's doing the best he can with what he has. After this, he brings the people back to the Lord God of their fathers. He has a heart of repentance, like his forefather, David. Verse 5, then he set judges in the land throughout all the fortified cities of Judah, city by city. He says to the judges, you take heed to what you're doing, for you do not judge for man, but for the Lord, who is with you in the judgment. Now therefore fear the Lord. Let it be upon you. Take care and do it, for there is no iniquity with the Lord our God, no partiality, nor taking of bribes. He's a good guy, trying to do the right thing. Moreover, in Jerusalem, for the judgment of the Lord and for controversies, Jehoshaphat appointed some of the Levites and priests and some of the chief fathers of Israel when they returned to Jerusalem. And he commanded them, saying, thus you shall act in the fear of the Lord faithfully and with a loyal heart. Whatever case comes to you from your brethren who dwell in the cities, whether of bloodshed or offenses against commandment or law, against statutes or ordinances, you shall warn them, lest they trespass against the Lord, and wrath come upon you and your brethren. Do this, and you will not be guilty. And take notice, Amariah, the chief priest, is over you in all matters of the Lord, and Zebediah, the son of Ishmael, the ruler of the house of Judah, for all the king's matters. Also the Levites will be officials before you. Behave courageously, and the Lord will be with the good. And I think this is the legacy that Jehoshaphat leaves behind. He sets an example overall. No, he's not a perfect guy, but he makes sure that everything is set up so that people after him, as he did, can serve the Lord and reap the benefit of that. And he says, even in this life, understand that the Lord is with the good. And he emphasizes to them, don't take bribes, execute justice properly. In other words, here's how you be good, and here's how the Lord is with you. And that's the life of Jehoshaphat. And that's the lesson I wish to leave with us this morning, that God is with the good. The question is, will he be with the descendants of Jehoshaphat as he was with Jehoshaphat? Will he be against the descendants of Ahab as he was against Ahab? And more importantly to consider, is the Lord with us? We determine whether he is. The Lord is with the good. He knows we're not going to be perfect, but he also knows if we have a heart for him and if we're trying to live for him, is the Lord with us? All right, any final comments through this section? I know we've jumped over to 2 Chronicles. We're going to go back to our 1 Kings, which is our main text for next time. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Rebecca. I like that. Thank you, Rebecca. What a great way to end. That's an excellent explanation of righteous judgment in the New Testament. Yeah, if you do it by God's standards and not by your own, it is not you who's doing the judging, but it's God. And not to condemn people in the sense of permanently, and you have no hope, but to help correct you so that you will not be condemned when you stand before Him in judgment. Very good. Thank you. Okay, any others? Terrific comment. So for next time, let's read the last 3 verses of 1 Kings. I know we've left these purposely so. This is the descendant of Ahab. His name is Ahaziah. Let's see what kind of a guy he is next week. So 1 Kings 22, verses 51 through 53. But just keep going in 2 Kings and read all of chapter 1, which is 18 verses, and we should be able to cover all that next week. Memory verse, 2 Kings 1:14. Verse 14, 2 Kings 1. We're about to see Elijah in his full power once more before he says, see y'all in heaven one day. Okay? All right, thanks.